the breakdown of where the money is coming from and how much this is going to cost is another area of focus that we'll get into. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Theo Champong. I think the connection is clear and stable now. Dr. Theo Champong, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Alfred. Good morning to our panelists.
Perfect. And I do appreciate your time this morning. Professor Bokpin, I mean, this week, you know, in fact, I was at the launch. After the launch, I was having a conversation with a development economist who has worked with the United Nations for quite a while. It says even the road to hell is paved with good intentions, because somehow there has to be something beyond just this.
That's a good
to
one.
ensure that if this policy is effectively implemented, the specific benchmarks that we're going to have to deal with to ensure that it comes to fruition for the greater good. You saw this document even before Wednesday and have had time to peruse it as well. What is in there that excites you?
Thank you very much.
What has to also be changed or improved?
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, and then good morning to our terrorist viewers. So there's a lot of positives from the document. You recall that one of the things that probably had created a lot of expectation yet to be fulfilled has to do with the 24-hour economic policy and all of that. So finally it's been launched and all of that. So overall, there's a genuine attempt to move this economy forward, just as many other governments in the time past have done. Good intentions, and I see a lot of good intentions in this document, but intentions necessarily are not achievements. You have to be able to have a strategy to translate that into accomplishments. And I have looked at the document, I mean, for some time now. I've looked at it in relation to several other policy documents that we have implemented in the last 25 years or so. That's how come I reference the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda 1, Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda 2. I've also looked at the document in relation to Ghana Beyond Aid, right? And then also, again, in terms of the program for coordinated program for economic and social development running from actually 2017 to 2024, but because of COVID, it was extended to 2025. I've looked at all of that. So if you put all of this together, really, you can't say there is much of a new thing in this policy. Let me put it that way. The diagnosis is not different from what we have read from all the other documents. Essentially, even if we don't want to use the same semantics, we are looking at changing the gov't economy. The economy that is predominantly based on export of primary commodities. And that is where I say that there are good intentions in this. Why? Because the diagnosis is right. We acknowledge that the economy fundamentally has not changed from what we inherited from our colonial ancestors in 1957, where predominantly more than almost 80% of our export earnings are still driven by primary commodities. In fact, when we say we have done well, it's more of the same. So when we say we have done well, it's more of the same because we have only added oil and gas. They are all still on process, and that is how we do it. So you can see the attempt to shift the economy structurally from that deformity, that is actually the word they use in this policy document, to one that is based on value added and all of that. And then again, when you read the document, you see, again, I respect them for the diagnosis they've done way back to the 60s, where the percentage of our manufacturing to GDP has hovered around 11-12%, okay, which was almost the same rate with respect to Malaysia, Thailand, and others. But in their growth takeoff, they have moved and added more value, and we have stayed almost at the same level and all of that. I also take inspiration from this document that there is an attempt to strengthen the employment response to growth, because we have seen positive growth in the last couple of decades, but largely have been jobless growth. That is what we have celebrated. So I see that over the period, 4-year period or so, they are looking at creating about 1.7 million jobs and all of that. So we'll go into the details. So when you look at all of that, the diagnosis from agriculture, the challenges and all of that, really, it is not new. It is not new. In fact, you can see great, and what I've done is to situate this policy document side by side, Ghana Beyond Aid, and to also situate this policy side by side, the IMF-supported program and all of that, and then see the synergies and all of that. In fact, in terms of conceptualization, there's really not much difference between this and Ghana Beyond Aid in terms of the focus, the direction. The only thing is that they christened the Ghana Beyond Aid, essentially in terms of domesticating the financing rather than depending on foreign aid and all of that. So from that broader framework, you see that. Then again, if you look at the economic development instruments, there's a difference between the policy framework in terms of the overall and the strategy to translate that into actual. Let's say the channel you want to use, call that one the economic development instrument. Under the Ghana Beyond Aid, you see the economic development instrument straddles across fiscal, monetary, fiscal incentives. We've spoken about incentives, monetary, then again, specific economic development instrument like one district, one factory, planting for food and jobs, and then even there's also planting for exports and development, and a whole lot of them, and all of that. In fact, beyond this economic development instrument, there are cross-cutting interventions, business support, digitization, because digitization is a cross-cutting intervention rather than the standalone intervention. You see all of that. The reason I'm saying this is this. We should be looking at positioning our policy interventions to ensure policy continuity. We need to do that. You know why we need to do that? Because under the Ghana Beyond Aid 1D, 1F, and the rest of them, monies have been spent.
Indeed.
Businesses have benefited. We can't look. I have done a review of these economic development instruments in terms of their impact, tracing it until COVID came and then after COVID and all that we have spent. So we've made some progress. My conclusion was that we could have done better, but the risk of not ensuring policy continuity. And when I read this, I want to see how this builds on all the successive things. It's good because it assures stakeholders and investors, because to the extent that it is not the government that is going to implement this program in terms of the financing, and I'll come to the financing and why I have reservations. So that's how we need to look at it. The other bit also is that...
in fact, we started the entire conversation with the continuity bit because it's key.
It's very key. So,
just PFD alone, almost $1 billion. We have to find a way of...
Let's call it another name. Grow24, I can link it to planting for food and jobs. I can link it there. It's just that we don't want to, maybe sometimes because of how to share the credit, and we don't have a formula for sharing credit.
No. Politicians are not good at sharing credit. Okay. They're like kids when it comes to that.
I have mapped them, this to this. I've done all of that. So Grow24, you can link it to that. In fact, actually make 24. Okay, 1D, 1F, and all of that. Of course, I see Grow24 in terms of a certain paradigm shift. Also using the voter lake and all of that, and exploring the potential, the economic potential of that. And I'm happy Dr. Tio Champon is here because he has also looked at the economic potential of the voter and all of that. And that tells you again the vision of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and all of that. We've abandoned all of that, and that is why policy continuity is very important and all of that. So I've seen how also this also seeks to also add I would say add, okay, to what we have seen in the time past and all of that. But there are other things that I think the government should take another look at. When I situate this policy, call it a program, side by side that of the IMF program, I see why the IMF program had a future and this may not.
Why?
I'm using the word may not, okay? May not because, and this is also my own suggestion to the government so that we find a way. I've read the document. There are good things in there and all of that. If we be able to implement them and all of that, it will be very great. One, we have implemented several IMF-supported programs in this country. In fact, actually, this is the 17th. Even though under the IMF, on the IMF website, they are indicating that we have been there 18 times.
And I support that.
Yes.
Because what we got is a program.
And then we are counting 17. But, Alfred, in all of this, we have not, as a country, created a secretariat for IMF-supported program. We haven't created an authority to implement IMF-supported program. We haven't. I will tell you why. So you see that, and over the years, anytime government comes out with flagship program, then we want to be able to take it away from the existing structures that we use to implement our development agenda.
Yeah.
That is the way you kill it very fast. And I'll tell you why. And it's also the reason why you find that IMF programs cut across regimes. This current program was started by the previous administration. The current government came. They are continuing with it. I'll tell you a few reasons in terms of the analysis I've done. We don't have a secretariat for IMF sitting anywhere in our ministries. But the program is running. Because it's about using the structures, the system, to implement the intervention you want to do. And that would actually represent a low-cost approach to implementing. That is something that we also haven't done well as a country. You see the previous admin we were talking about, we created Southern Development Days, days that budgetary allocation. What is the value? Couldn't we have implemented a lot of almost all those things using the existing channels? We have the local government, we have a decentralized government system and all of that. Budgetary allocations, there are civil servants who are recruited, professionals trained and all of that. They implement all of this. Why do we want to create an authority?
So there was a Northern Development Authority,
Yes.
Coastal Development Authority, and so on. Yeah,
So since 1992, if you check the cost drive, you realize that the administrative cost of implementing policies and all have expanded hugely. But what is the cost? What is the value from all of that? How do we implement this with a low-cost approach and all of that? And that's why I'm saying that if you create an authority,
True.
you create a secretariat and all of that, in fact, what it means is that this is going to be like a standalone. We are not infusing it within the system and build ownership. There are three framework or building blocks for assessing the feasibility, implementability of a program. Is it acceptable? Is it feasible? Suitable? And all of that. To do all of this and check all of that is about how you want to use the system, how the various structures would accept that, work with that, and all of that. And I'll give you a couple of examples. If you look at, so you just look at the cost builder, administrative cost builder, that the previous administration used in implementing some of these programs. Huge. Huge. At the end of the day, the recruitment will be party lines and all of that. We don't need to create it. For instance, if Ghana Police Service, with all due respect, tells me that they are now creating a unit for 24-hour economy, I'm asking myself, it should be a mindset.
which they have, actually.
Okay, it should be a mindset. I don't know what the strategy they want to implement. In fact, even those who do the first shift and will go and sleep need protection as much as those who go for the third shift. It's a mindset. We have to revolutionize our mindset. And that is why you see that the Ghana Beyond Aid, apart from the hardcore issues and the rest of them, there is the issue about the mindset, the soft skills. I see that also in this program when they talk about, is it Make 24,
Make 24.
Grow 24, Show 24, Grow 24,
24,
and all of that. There's the mobilization, mindset shift, and all of that. So I may work for the first shift, but I should work with that mindset. I should work with that same drive and all of that. Look, you check Ghana, the National Health Insurance Authority, right? From the time it was set up to implement this, to date, almost 44% of the total allocation to them now goes to administrative. How do you pay claims promptly? Check Cocobod and the rest, and check other countries like Côte d'Ivoire and the rest of them. It is possible that now Cocobod may have more V8s than cocoa beans. Okay, and all of that. So we should be looking at the cost of implementing our development policies and the rest of them, so that we don't burden the taxpayer on us and the rest of them. Then again, the other bit is all of this is not just to run down the program, but I believe that I've told you how I respect this program and the rest of it, but we can make it work. We can make it work. When I look at and I've again looked at the policy in relation to the NDC's manifesto.
Right.
And here I want to say this. From the NDC's manifesto, the 24-hour economy is the overall framework.
Essentially, yes.
From which fiscal policy, monetary policy are anchored and all of that. I don't see that in the program eventually as it has been developed. It looks to me at some point that is subordinate to a certain framework from fiscal and monetary that will be developed and all of that. And that is why I'm saying that if you look at it from that perspective, you understand why the costing of the program really
is the 4 billion.
Is the 4 billion. But actually, you need more than 4 billion if you are looking at this 24-hour economy from that conceptualization and everything. And that is where you see a big difference between this and then the IMF supported program. Because if you see how the IMF supported program was developed, and the phasing and the reporting and all the data reporting weekly, monthly, quarterly from Ministry of Finance, from Bank of Ghana, and the rest of them, and all of that builds ownership, binds us, okay, and all of that. We don't have that in here. Of course, I've seen some period, 2026, 2028, 2025, and the rest of them. It's very difficult tracking from that. We need to have those KPIs, link that to the critical success factors within this program policy, because it's not just a policy, it's a program, it's a development, the economic development instrument, all captured in this and all of this. So that is what I think we should be able to do. This is how I see this policy. I see that they can add to this policy, to this document, they can, so that given that the government does not intend to go for another program from 2026, I think we should be looking at how we can flesh in this as a successor to that. That binds us with reporting lines, review timelines, okay, that allows us to track the data. And we may not need to create a secretariat necessary for this, because when it comes to the data tracking and the rest of them, we have Ghana Statistical Service. When it comes to the fiscal side and the rest of it, we have Ministry of Finance. And that is why you see IMF review every 6 months, and yet there's no secretariat here. And in fact, even though IMF has an office here, it's not an implementing agency or something, because the Ministry of Finance reports submit the data, Bank of Ghana reports submit the data, Ministry of Finance, there are institutions under Ministry of Finance that also supply data to Ministry of Finance, institutions that also supply data to Bank of Ghana, and all of this is done. That way, it makes it, it will bind us. So for instance, 6 months from now, what are the targets under the program? How is this linked to overall economic growth, human development, and all of that? So we have the economic development instrument. We are situating them within the 3 sectorial disaggregations, agri, industry, service. What is the projected growth under this 24-hour economy? 6 months, 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years, and all of that. So that if we are not on track, we're able to analyze the variance. To do that, what are the reforms that we need to do? Governance, market reforms, product reforms, and all of that. I think those are the things we can learn substantially from that. And again, I will say that let's read the IMF supported program. Let's look at how it was designed. Let's look at the monitoring mechanisms in place, the target, the KPIs, the reforms, and all of that. Who is doing what? Who is doing that? The reporting timeline by which this way it then compels us to go beyond just putting the document together, because it's easier to reference, read from here, and all of that. Then we can also look at the costing effectively. So you see the IMF program in terms of the fiscal and the rest of them. There's the program financing gap that was initially estimated to be around $15 billion in balance of payment support, right? Then the next important question was, how do you finance this? The IMF said they will give $3 billion. The World Bank says they will give 1.5 or 1.6 billion. Then substantially we estimated that there will be a gap of almost $11 billion. Where would that come from? So it has to come from debt restructuring. Yeah. Okay, so they have to come on board. And so when you do all of this, by the time you go through all of this, it then draws all the other institutions, and then you build ownership. So even if you don't create a secretariat, the Ministry of Finance is running with it. Ghana Statistical Service know what they have to do. A Bank of Ghana knows what they have to do from all of that. So I think that is how I see it. And I want to commend government, because you see, coming out with something like this, even within this short time, it's been a lot of work. I've seen the consultations, submissions from CSOs, and my very good friend, Bryce Simmons, also made a submission, and all of that. Very good. I would say that it's an added advantage. If you read the Ghana Beyond Aid, there were similar submissions, even from Department of Economics, colleges, KNUST, the rest of them. Again, if you look at Ghana Beyond Aid, there was an attempt, let me say this, there was an attempt to take policies out of it, but it actually didn't work.
Why did it not work if there was an attempt to?
Because we see these things as isolated, rather than using the structures and building the ownership. They talked about how to implement it. A council to be chaired by the president. Is that okay? Or in his absence, the vice. And then they talked about an opposition member being this and all of that. There was an attempt within the Ghana Beyond Aid to try and make it national and all of that. So that's why I'm saying that having gone through all of this, if you look at Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda 1, Ghana Shared Growth and Development, and all of this, and there's always an attempt to make it look national. And yet, we have failed as much as we conceptualize it. The question is, going forward, how do we do it? And that's what I'm saying, that how have other programs that we have implemented, I hope you understand that, even started by a different regime, and yet the other one, of course, somebody will say, well, if you go against the IMF, there are penalties. Why can't we impose similar penalties on ourselves?
So that if a government fails to continue projects that are analyzed to be beyond that, well thought through and good,
even beyond that,
punished for that.
Yes, Alfred, beyond that, 6 months from now, if this program has KPIs with timelines, and we are saying that 6 months' time, there's going to be a public review, a cabinet review of this. It will be shown on TV. I hope you understand that. And all of that. Everybody will be working towards it. Because if the sector minister knows that in 6 months my performance is going to be reviewed, the results of that is going to be made public. People respond to incentives. It's not just incentives in this document that businesses to respond to. As a worker, I respond to incentives. As a sector minister, people respond to incentives. The incentive mechanism we put in here, it may be a reward, it may be a chastisement, it may be a discipline or whatever. We need to have all of it. Otherwise, you see, we can discuss this, and Ghana, we are used to that. In the next 6 months, after that, I hope you understand that, it just dies down. Because after that, there's no 6-month review. There's no 8-month review where we'll come back to this. But I can tell you, investors, stakeholders, everybody reads the IMF supported program. True. Because, in fact, the board is going to meet, is it July 7th or so? The report of the board will be made what? Public. In fact, you know the reason why some of us and CSOs are more happy when Ghana is under IMF program? Because there's more data. When they do the review, the outcome is published. So if the government is not doing well, they will know. There's no politics about debt numbers. There's no politics about this. Of course, I see now that we are going to create the fiscal council. My good friend is here, Dr. Chue Champon. That's his free elective, right? And all of that. So the idea is that the fiscal council will be some kind of an internal, institutional restraint agent similar to the IMF. No, we are not accountable to ourselves. That's the issue. When we're under IMF program, we are accountable because we know that there are these things. And that is why when the government said that they will not go for another program, but they will rather go for policy support instrument, we said, that there's risk there because policy support instrument overall is advisory. It's not binding. And all of, how do we make this program get input? We can refine it. I mean, that's how I see it. And all of that. We can refine it and make it binding, where maybe every 6 months there are key performance indicators. And then we look at the data reporting and the rest of them. Look, there's one thing that I'm also not happy. And I need to say it here. Almost all our national development policy assessment and everything, we hardly reference our own data generation. We will reference World Bank survey. They have come to do for us. We will reference this, we will reference all of that. In fact, this should help us internalize data generation and make the development people-centered, Ghana-centered, so that going for the IMF will reference the report data. I hope you understand that. World Bank will reference investors, stakeholders. That is how every country that has developed has designed its own national framework of data generation, align it to what they want, and the rest of them. It's not everything the West, the powers that be want that we actually want for ourselves.